They called him Elias Vorn, not because it was his real name. No one alive knew that anymore, but because it was the name whispered in the shadows of every war-torn world, the name etched in the annals of both triumph and devastation. He was a human, though many doubted it. To those who had seen him in action, he seemed more like a force of nature than a man. His reputation was a storm that swept across the galaxy, leaving awe and fear in its wake. Elias was born into obscurity on a forgotten colony world at the edge of human space, a place where survival wasn't guaranteed and hope was a luxury. His parents were miners, scraping out a living beneath the planet's toxic skies. By the time he could walk, Elias had learned to navigate the labyrinthine tunnels of the mines, his small hands already calloused from labor. But there was something different about him, even then. While others resigned themselves to the crushing monotony of survival, Elias thrived. He absorbed knowledge like a sponge, devouring every scrap of information he could find. Engineering schematics, ancient Earth literature, tactical manuals left behind by soldiers long dead. By age 15, he had built his first weapon, a railgun cobbled together from mining equipment and scavenged parts. By 20, he had single-handedly defended his settlement from a band of raiders using traps so ingenious they became local legend. The settlers called him the Ghost of Iron Ridge, but Elias didn't care for titles. He cared only for results. It wasn't long before his exploits caught the attention of Earth's Central Intelligence Directorate. They came for him in the night, offering him a choice: rot away on his dying colony or join them and see the stars. He chose the stars. The Directorate trained him to be more than just a soldier. They molded him into a weapon. He mastered hand-to-hand combat, marksmanship, infiltration, and languages, both human and alien. They sent him on missions no one else could survive. Assassinations deep within enemy territory, sabotage operations on hostile worlds, intelligence extractions from under the noses of alien warlords. Time and again, he succeeded where others would have failed or died. But it wasn't just his skill that set him apart. It was his mind. Elias had an uncanny ability to see patterns where others saw chaos, to predict outcomes with almost machine-like precision. In battle, he was unstoppable. In negotiations, unshakable. He became humanity's secret weapon in its struggle against the Galactic Concord, a coalition of alien species that viewed humans as little more than pests to be exterminated. For decades, Elias operated in the shadows, tipping the scales in humanity's favor one mission at a time. He dismantled Concord supply lines, turned their allies against them, and sowed dissent within their ranks. To them, he was a phantom, a myth designed to frighten children and soldiers alike. But myths have power. As humanity's war with the Concord dragged on, Elias began to see cracks forming, not just in their alliance, but within himself. The years of violence took their toll. Every mission left scars on his body and soul. He started questioning the Directorate's motives, wondering if humanity's survival justified the atrocities he committed in its name. Then came the mission that changed everything. It was supposed to be routine. Infiltrate a Concord research facility on an uncharted moon and retrieve data on their latest weapon project. But what Elias found there shattered his perception of the war and himself. The facility wasn't developing weapons. It was housing refugees, aliens who had fled their own worlds to escape humanity's relentless advance. In that moment, Elias realized that the war wasn't as black and white as he'd been led to believe. The Concord wasn't just an enemy. It was an alliance of species fighting for survival against an aggressor they barely understood. And humanity wasn't just defending itself. It was expanding at any cost. Elias completed his mission, but didn't return to Earth with the data. Instead, he disappeared. For years after that, he became a ghost once more. Not for humanity, but for everyone. He moved between worlds like a shadow, gathering information and forging unlikely alliances among alien species who hated humans almost as much as they feared them. He became something new, not a soldier or an agent, but an ambassador, an emissary between enemies who had never truly understood each other. And then came the event, The moment when Elias Vorn would step out of the shadows and into history as not just a man, but the man who ended an intergalactic war. But that part of the story comes later. For now, all you need to know is this. Elias Vorn wasn't born extraordinary. He became extraordinary because he refused to accept limits, his own or anyone else's. And when history remembers him, as it surely will, it won't be for his victories or his failures, but for one simple truth. He was human, and sometimes that's enough. The Great Intergalactic War did not begin with a single shot or a dramatic declaration. It began, as most wars do, with whispers in the dark, with tensions simmering beneath the surface of galactic diplomacy, and with the slow, inevitable collision of ambitions too vast to coexist. The seeds of the war were sown long before humanity even knew the names of its adversaries. And by the time the first fleets clashed in the void between stars, the conflict had already become unstoppable. For centuries, the Milky Way had been dominated by the Terran Concordium, a sprawling alliance of human-led systems that had risen to prominence through a combination of technological ingenuity and relentless expansion. The Concordium was not merely a political entity. It was an empire in all but name, its influence stretching across billions of light years. It was humanity's crowning achievement, a testament to their ability to conquer not only their own weaknesses, but also the vastness of space itself. But power breeds resentment. Beyond the edges of Concordium-controlled space lay the Terran Commonwealth, a coalition of alien civilizations united by their shared disdain for humanity's dominance. The Commonwealth was smaller than the Concordium, but no less ambitious. Its leader, Logan Jackson, a charismatic and ruthless visionary, had long viewed humanity as a threat to galactic stability. Jackson's rhetoric painted the Concordium as an imperialist juggernaut, consuming resources and cultures in its insatiable march across the stars. The spark that ignited the war came in 3251, when a Commonwealth trade vessel was attacked by pirates in Concordium territory. The Terran authorities refused to intervene, dismissing it as a purely Commonwealth matter. To Jackson and his allies, this was more than negligence. It was an insult, a reminder that humanity saw itself as above reproach. When Jackson presented his case for war to the Commonwealth Senate, he found an audience already primed for conflict. The vote for war was unanimous. What followed was Operation Divergence, a masterstroke of subterfuge and strategy. Commonwealth agents infiltrated the outer territories of the Concordium, stirring unrest among populations already discontented with their second-class status. These outer worlds were industrial powerhouses but suffered from neglect and exploitation by their distant rulers. When rebellions erupted on Janur III and Yanis V, they spread like wildfire, fueled by promises of freedom and equality under Commonwealth rule. The Concordium responded with force, deploying fleets to crush the uprisings and secure its borders. But it was too late. By March 3251, much of the Outer Rim had fallen into Commonwealth hands. The war had begun. At first, it seemed as though humanity might be outmatched. The Commonwealth had allied itself with other powerful factions from the Andromeda Galaxy, including the militaristic Viranian Empire, a species whose expansionist ambitions mirrored those of humanity itself. Together, they formed the Resolution Coalition, a formidable counterbalance to Concordium power. The early years of the war were marked by brutal fighting across both galaxies. Entire star systems were reduced to rubble as fleets clashed in battles that spanned light years. Planets became fortresses or graveyards depending on which side claimed them. The Resolution Coalition launched daring invasions into Milky Way space while fending off Concordium counterattacks in Andromeda. But humanity proved resilient. The Concordium's industrial might allowed it to replace losses faster than its enemies could inflict them. Its scientists developed new weapons and technologies that turned the tide of battle. Cloaking devices that rendered ships invisible to enemy sensors, nanite swarms capable of dismantling entire fleets molecule by molecule, and hyper-advanced AI strategists that could predict enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. By 3260, the balance of power had shifted. The Concordium launched a series of devastating offensives into Andromeda, targeting key coalition strongholds and supply lines. These campaigns culminated in the Battle of Arinder, a conflict so massive it blotted out stars with its carnage. Though costly for both sides, it shattered the coalition's ability to mount large-scale operations. Yet victory remained elusive. For every coalition fleet destroyed, another seemed to rise from Andromeda's depths. For every planet reclaimed by humanity, another fell under enemy control. The war dragged on for decades, consuming resources and lives at an unimaginable rate. And then there were the others. Neither side had accounted for them, the ancient powers lurking on the fringes of known space. Some were machines older than recorded history. Others were biological nightmares born from evolutionary paths no one could comprehend. They watched as humanity and its enemies tore each other apart. And then they acted. The automatons came first. Vast fleets of self-replicating machines that descended upon both galaxies without warning or mercy. Their motives were inscrutable, their methods devastating. Entire sectors fell silent as they swept through space like a plague. Next came the Terminids, a hive-mind species whose swarms devoured everything in their path. They emerged from beyond Andromeda's edge, drawn by the chaos of war like vultures to carrion. Suddenly, humanity and its enemies faced annihilation not from each other, but from forces beyond their understanding or control. The Great Intergalactic War became something else entirely, a struggle not just for dominance, but for survival itself. And amid this maelstrom stood Elias Vorn, a man who would one day be remembered not for his battles, but for what came after them. Elias Vorn's entry into the Great Intergalactic War was not marked by fanfare or ceremony. It was quiet, almost unremarkable, like the first pebble dislodged before an avalanche. At the time, he was just another operative in the sprawling machinery of the Terran Concordium's intelligence network, a cog in a system that churned endlessly to keep humanity's war machine running. But Elias was no ordinary cog, and his actions, small as they seemed at first, would ripple outward to change the course of history. When the war began in 3251, Elias was stationed on a backwater colony world called Kessin Prime. Officially, he was there as a logistics officer, overseeing supply routes that fed the Concordium's outermost fleets. Unofficially, he was embedded to root out dissent among the locals, a population of miners and industrial workers who had grown restless under Concordium rule. It was a thankless job, one that required patience, subtlety, and a willingness to get his hands dirty. Elias excelled at it. Kessin Prime was strategically insignificant, or so the director believed. Its mines produced rare alloys used in starship hulls, but its location, far from any major trade routes or military installations, made it an unlikely target for enemy action. That assumption proved fatal. In late 3251, just months after the war began, Kessin Prime became one of the first planets to fall to the Resolution Coalition. The attack came without warning. Commonwealth infiltrators had been operating on the planet for years, quietly arming and organizing the discontented miners. When the Coalition fleet arrived in orbit, it wasn't met with resistance, it was met with open arms. The local population rose up against their Concordium overseers, seizing control of key facilities and handing them over to their new allies. Elias could have escaped. He had access to a directorate shuttle hidden in a remote canyon outside the colony's main settlement. But escape wasn't in his nature, not when there was still work to be done. Instead of fleeing, he went underground, using his training to evade capture while gathering intelligence on the coalition forces occupying the planet. For 6 months, Elias operated alone behind enemy lines. He sabotaged supply depots, intercepted communications, and assassinated key coalition officers, all while feeding critical information back to Concordium Command through a makeshift transmitter he'd built from scavenged parts. His actions didn't go unnoticed. By the time Kessin Prime was liberated in early 3252, Elias had become a legend among both his allies and his enemies. But liberation came at a cost. The Coalition didn't relinquish Kessin Prime without a fight, and their scorched earth tactics left much of the planet uninhabitable. When Concordium forces finally secured control of the surface, they found Elias in what remained of the colony's central hub, a gaunt figure surrounded by wreckage and corpses. He'd survived on ration packs stolen from enemy supplies and water filtered through improvised purifiers. His body bore scars from firefights and near misses with coalition patrols. His mind carried scars far deeper. Yet he didn't break. The Directorate recognized his value immediately. They pulled him from fieldwork and brought him back to Earth for debriefing, a process that lasted weeks as they extracted every scrap of intelligence he'd gathered during his time on Kessin Prime. When it was over, they gave him a choice: return to active duty as an operative or join Project Aegis. Project Aegis was one of the Directorate's most ambitious initiatives, a program designed to create operatives capable of operating independently across multiple theaters of war. Participants were given access to cutting-edge technology, neural implants that enhanced cognitive function, nanite-based medical systems that accelerated healing, and exosuits that augmented strength and reflexes. But these enhancements came at a price. Those who underwent them often found themselves estranged from normal human interactions, their minds and bodies altered in ways that set them apart from their peers. Elias accepted without hesitation. The transformation was grueling. The implants caused excruciating pain as they integrated with his nervous system. The nanites left him racked with fever as they rewrote his cellular structure. The exosuit training pushed his body to its limits and beyond. But Elias endured it all with stoic determination. By the time he emerged from Project Aegis 6 months later, he was no longer just an operative, he was something more. His first mission after Aegis took him deep into Commonwealth territory, an infiltration operation on the industrial world of Virak 4. The planet was a linchpin in the Coalition supply chain, producing weapons and ammunition for their fleets. Elias's task was simple in concept, but nearly impossible in execution. Disable Virak IV's orbital defense grid so that Concordium forces could launch a surprise assault. He succeeded, but not without cost. During his infiltration of Virak IV's command center, Elias encountered something unexpected: civilians, alien workers forced into servitude by their own government to fuel its war effort. They weren't soldiers. They weren't even willing participants in the conflict. They were victims caught in its machinery. Elias made a choice that day, a choice that would haunt him for years to come. He completed his mission but spared the workers, allowing them to flee before Concordium forces arrived. It was an act of mercy that went against everything he'd been trained to do, and it nearly cost him his life when Coalition reinforcements arrived sooner than expected. He barely escaped Virak 4 with his life, and when he returned to Earth, he found himself under scrutiny from his superiors. Mercy wasn't part of their calculus. Efficiency was all that mattered. But Elias refused to apologize for what he'd done, or explain why he'd done it. Over time, missions like Virak 4 became more frequent, and so did Elias's doubts about humanity's role in the war. He began to see patterns others missed: how both sides exploited civilians for their own ends, how propaganda twisted truth into weaponized lies, how victory seemed less about survival and more about domination. And yet he continued fighting, because even as doubt gnawed at him like a parasite burrowed deep within his soul, he still believed there might be something worth saving at humanity's core, even if it would take someone like him to find it amidst all this chaos. Elias Vorn's war became a series of contradictions. He was a man who could kill with precision and efficiency, yet he found himself questioning the necessity of every life he took. He was humanity's most effective operative, yet he began to doubt whether humanity deserved the victory it so desperately sought. These contradictions didn't weaken him. They sharpened him, like a blade honed against the grindstone of his own conscience. And as the war dragged on, Elias found himself drawn deeper into its darkest recesses, where morality and survival blurred into indistinguishable shades of gray. By 3265, the Great Intergalactic War had reached a stalemate. The Terran Concordium and the Resolution Coalition were locked in a brutal war of attrition, their fleets clashing in battles that left entire star systems as little more than fields of debris. The automatons and terminids, The ancient threats that had emerged from the fringes of known space had forced both sides to divert resources to their containment, adding another layer of complexity to an already incomprehensible conflict. It was no longer a war for dominance. It was a war for endurance. Elias had become something of an enigma within the Concordium's directorate. His missions were classified at the highest levels, his actions known only to a handful of individuals. To most, he was a ghost, a name whispered in corridors and briefing rooms, a figure whose exploits bordered on myth. But to those who knew him, Elias was more than just an operative. He was a weapon wielded with surgical precision against humanity's enemies. It was during this period that Elias was assigned what would later be known as the Ardent Protocol mission. The Concordium had intercepted intelligence suggesting that the Coalition was developing a superweapon, a device capable of destabilizing entire star systems by collapsing their suns into black holes. The project, codenamed Ardent Protocol, was being developed on a remote research station orbiting the gas giant Zinthras Prime deep within Andromeda territory. The mission brief was clear: infiltrate the station, gather intelligence on the weapon's capabilities, and destroy it if possible. But there was one complication. The station's lead scientist was Dr. Elias Vorn, a former Concordium physicist who had defected to the Coalition years earlier. Vorn wasn't just another traitor. She had been one of the brightest minds in human science, a pioneer in quantum mechanics and energy manipulation. Her defection had been a blow to the Concordium's scientific community, and her involvement in Ardent Protocol made her a high-value target. Elias knew what his superiors expected: eliminate Vorn along with the weapon. But as always, he approached his mission with pragmatism rather than blind obedience. Infiltrating Zinthras Station was no small feat. The facility was protected by advanced AI security systems and patrolled by Coalition soldiers equipped with cutting-edge combat gear. Elias spent weeks preparing for the operation, studying schematics and enemy patrol patterns until he could navigate the station in his sleep. When he finally made his move, it was with the precision of a predator stalking its prey. He breached the station's outer hull, using an experimental stealth pod designed to evade detection by even the most sophisticated sensors. Once inside, he moved like a shadow through its corridors, neutralizing guards and bypassing security systems with ease. By the time he reached the central laboratory, where Ardent Protocol was being developed, he had left no trace of his presence, save for the bodies of those unfortunate enough to cross his path. What Elias found in that lab changed everything. The weapon wasn't just theoretical, it was operational. A prototype sat at the center of the room, its core glowing with an eerie blue light that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. Surrounding it were banks of computers displaying streams of data incomprehensible even to someone as well-read as Elias. And standing before it all was Dr. Elias Vorn herself, a woman whose brilliance radiated from her like an aura. But she wasn't alone. Beside her stood representatives from several alien species, scientists and engineers who had set aside their differences to collaborate on this monstrous creation. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices tinged with urgency and fear. It didn't take long for Elias to realize why. They weren't building this weapon out of malice or ambition. They were building it out of desperation. The Terminids were advancing faster than anyone had anticipated. Entire sectors had fallen silent as their swarms consumed everything in their path. The Coalition believed that Ardent Protocol might be their only chance at survival, a last-ditch effort to hold back an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Elias could have killed them all right then and there, Vorn, her alien collaborators, even the guard station outside the lab, but something stopped him. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was doubt. Maybe it was something deeper, a flicker of understanding that transcended loyalty or duty. Instead of attacking, Elias revealed himself. The room erupted into chaos as guards raised their weapons and scientists scrambled for cover. But Vorn stopped them with a single word: wait. She recognized him immediately, not just as an operative, but as someone she'd once worked alongside during her time with the Concordium. Her expression shifted from fear to something resembling pity as she addressed him directly. You don't understand what's happening here. And so began one of the most pivotal conversations in Elias's life. A conversation that would challenge everything he thought he knew about humanity's place in this war. Varney's explained how Ardent Protocol worked, not as a weapon, but as a shield capable of creating localized black holes to contain Terminid swarms or automaton fleets before they could spread further devastation across Andromeda or Milky Way space alike. She spoke passionately about how cooperation between species, not domination, was humanity's best hope for survival against these existential threats. For hours they debated. Elias Vorn stood in the cold, sterile laboratory of Zintheris Station, surrounded by beings who should have been his enemies. The prototype of the Ardent Protocol pulsed ominously behind him, a device that could collapse stars and reshape the galaxy, or save it. Dr. Taylor Varney's, once a traitor to humanity and now a desperate scientist clinging to hope, had laid bare the truth. This was no weapon of conquest. It was a shield, a last-ditch effort to stop the Terminids and automatons from consuming everything. The room was silent except for the faint hum of machinery. The alien scientists, representatives of species that had fought humanity tooth and nail for decades, watched Elias with a mixture of fear and defiance. They expected him to do what humans always did in their eyes: destroy, conquer, dominate. They expected him to pull the trigger. But Elias Vorn was no ordinary human. He lowered his weapon slowly, deliberately, and let it clatter to the floor. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. The guards tensed, their weapons trained on him, but Elias raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to kill you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here to end this war." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For a moment, no one moved. Then Varney stepped forward cautiously, her eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you risk everything, your mission, your life, for this?" Elias met her gaze without flinching. "Because I've seen what this war has done, not just to us, but to all of us. I've seen planets burned to ash, families torn apart, entire civilizations reduced to rubble. And I've seen what comes next if we don't stop fighting each other." He gestured toward the glowing core of the Ardent Protocol. "This isn't just your last chance, it's ours too. Humanity can't survive alone against the Terminids or automatons any more than you can. If we keep fighting each other, there won't be anything left to fight for." The alien scientists exchanged uncertain glances. One of them, a tall, insectoid being with iridescent chitin, clicked its mandibles nervously before speaking in halting galactic comment. "Human words easy," it said. "Human actions not same." Elias nodded grimly. "You're right," he admitted. "We've made mistakes, terrible ones. We've been arrogant and short-sighted and ruthless in our pursuit of survival. But that doesn't mean we can't change." He turned back to Varney's, his voice rising with conviction. "You once believed in humanity's potential. You believed we could be more than conquerors or destroyers. That's why you defected, isn't it? Because you thought we'd lost our way." Varney's hesitated, but finally nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "Well," Elias continued, "it's time to prove we have it." With that, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, a portable hollow emitter linked directly to the Concordium's central command network. Activating, it would alert his superiors to his location and bring an entire fleet crashing down on Zintheris Station within hours. He held it up for everyone to see before placing it on the floor at his feet. "I'm not calling them," he said simply. "Not yet." The room erupted into chaos as the guards shouted warnings and leveled their weapons at him again. But Elias didn't move. "If you kill me now," he said evenly, "you'll prove every lie my people have ever told about you. That you're savages who can't be trusted or reasoned with." He stepped away from the device slowly until he stood directly in front of Arnie's. "But if you let me go, if you let me take what I've learned here back to my people, you'll give us a chance to be better than we've been." Varney stared at him for what felt like an eternity before finally nodding. "You're taking a hell of a risk," she murmured. "So are you," Elias replied. What followed was one of the most dangerous gambles in galactic history. Elias returned to Concordium space with evidence not only of Ardent Protocol's true purpose, but also of the Coalition's willingness to cooperate against their shared enemies. It wasn't easy convincing his superiors. Many within the Directorate saw his actions as treasonous and demanded his execution. But Elias had anticipated this reaction, and he came prepared. Using data gathered during his infiltration missions across Coalition territory, and corroborated by Varnes herself, he presented an undeniable case. Humanity could not win this war alone. The Terminids were advancing faster than anyone had predicted. Automaton incursions were increasing exponentially. Resources were dwindling on both sides faster than they could be replenished. The only path forward was unity, not as conquerors or subjects, but as equals bound by necessity. It took months of negotiations and more than one assassination attempt. But eventually Elias succeeded where no one else could have. He brokered an uneasy truce between humanity and its former enemies. The first joint operation against the Terminids took place in 3267. A combined fleet composed of Concordium battleships alongside Coalition cruisers, and even alien vessels from neutral factions who had been inspired by Elias's vision for peace through cooperation. It wasn't perfect. There were betrayals along the way. Old grudges died hard. But slowly trust began replacing hatred between species who had once seen each other only through crosshairs. And when final victory came against both Terminids and automatons alike years later, it wasn't because one side triumphed over another. It was because they triumphed together. Humanity didn't win because they were stronger or smarter. They won because they proved capable not just destruction but enlightenment.